everybody. It's Stephen Feuertrees, otherwise known as Stephen Feuerstein, here with another Feuer tip. And I have with me today Chris Saxon.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
The Oracle Developer Advocates team, which I used to lead, but now they're doing even better and better and better without me. And I'm just happy as can be with that. Chris, thanks for coming back. So, folks, we're going to spend some time talking about, this will be our last, I believe it's our last, table function Feuer tip. I think it's the fourth or maybe the fourth we've done. Chris did one before, said he'd come back for PDFs. We're doing PDFs today. Before we dive into that, Mark, if you could share my screen for a moment. I just want to remind everybody that one of the things I'm working on most avidly these days is a new project called Apex D2D, Developer to Developer. We're putting together a platform, we being InSum and 3 other Apex consultancies, putting together a platform where you'll be able to request real-time online mentoring and code problem solving with other Apex developers and Oracle database developers around the world. We're kicking it off on November 30th. Hopefully it'll be an ongoing concern from there. Go to apexd2d.net and you can register as either a helper, you'll be helping others, or a developer who will be asking for help. And on November 23rd, you'll be able to actually grab a session with the experts. Stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much. So let's see. It's been a busy several weeks. Since my name is Feuertrees, I have to mention that COP26 is going on. Governments around the world are planning how to save our planet and save humans. And boy, they're not very impressive yet. But I saw one very impressive factoid. The largest delegation from any single sector / country, fossil fuel lobbyists and delegates, over 500 delegates from fossil fuel companies. Yeah, because they really care about stopping the extraction of fossil fuels. Anyway, enough cynicism. What we need is inspiration. We need to enjoy our world of cyber bits, divorced from reality as much as we can possibly get. And if you're into Facebook and Meta, I guess the metaverse is coming for you. But for today, Chris, let's talk about polymorphic table functions.
Yes, okay, let's talk about polymorphic table functions. So Mark, if you could just share my screen, we can get that up. And actually what I'll do, before we talk about that, let's imagine that we're trying to do something here. So I've selected from the employees table, and let's say I just want to remove this column, the hire date column, from the results. And there's like, I know 10 odd columns here. So in order to do that, what do I have to do? I have to list them all out individually like this. So I've got every single column, I'll open every column except hire date, and you can see hire date's now gone from the results. So, okay, that's nice, but that's a lot of typing here, right? Isn't it? I have to list them all out, and some tables have like 30, 40, 50, whatever columns. If I only want to remove 1 or 2 of them, that's a bit of a pain. It'd be nice if I could just do like this. If I could do like select star everything except the hire date. But of course, we try and run that, and what happens? We get an error. So this is not, Oracle SQL syntax. So we don't have this kind of capability. And there are situations where it would be really nice, and we can actually use polymorphic table functions to do this. Now, before we kind of get into that, at this point, some of you were probably like gripping your keyboard and kind of going, what is he doing? Select star accept. You've been telling us for years how bad select star is. This is horrendous nonsense, all that kind of thing, right? So you see them smiling away there. Yeah, I mean, I think in general, certainly, if you're writing application code, this is probably a bad idea because, all the things about select star, if we add or remove columns from the table, we've probably broken our code, or we might break our code accidentally. And we're probably the various kind of performance aspects, like we're selecting more information than we need potentially, which can make, can make things slower. That said, I think there's at least 2 scenarios where this functionality can be really useful. If you've got any others in the comments, I'd love to hear them. But the 2 I can think of, one is if you're just doing some like ad hoc querying like this. Like I say, if I've got a table with lots of columns on it and I just want to strip a few out from the results, it's quite common to have like a description or a notes column, which is like got text this long in it, and it just pushes your results out, so you have to scroll across the screen. if you're just doing some ad hoc querying, it's kind of nice to remove that. The other situation is actually if you're doing like a multi-stage query like this. So if we want to do like a top 10 per group type problem, I have to do it in 2 stages. I've got a subquery where I assign the row numbers and I filter it out here. And I only really need this to do it, the filtering in the outside. It's not really relevant to the results. And you can see I have actually selected all the columns I really want in my final results here. And if I've got like, say 20 or 30 of these, then it'd be kind of nice to just say everything except row number, because I've already explicitly listed out what I want somewhere, right? As long as you've done it somewhere in this chain, there might be intermediate columns which you need to get the results, but aren't really relevant to the result. You just like to knock them out of the outputs without having to list everything out all over again and have like SQL statements which are pages long because you've just got like listing all your columns there. So there's a couple of using situations where I think this would be useful. If you've got others, yeah, I'd love to hear them. So as I said, we can do this with polymorphic table functions. And what these allow you to do is basically manipulate the result set. So add or remove columns, and you can also do things like duplicate rows and so on. I'll keep it nice and simple for this one because these get complicated very quickly. So basically, I've just got my package, and I'm going to accept a list of columns I want to remove from the results. So that's my package spec. And then in my body, I just iterate through the columns in the table and say, if it's in that list of columns I passed here, then I set these properties to false for read and pass through. So pass through means don't show it in the output. So if I do select star, it won't appear. For read is if I've got, if I want to do process the actual rows themselves, whether or not I can use this value there. And that's not relevant here. I mean, in general, we might have a fetch rows procedure as well, where if I'm adding columns to the results, I need to define their values, right? And so we'd have a procedure to do that. But in this case, just nice and simple. I'll just do a scribe only. And then we create the polymorphic table function itself. And then let's make sure I created these as I expect. So let's execute those. Yep, those are both worked. Got the lovely warnings there. And we'll create my function. So notice that's saying it's using that package. So this package is the implementation, so that kind of binds it. So now we can just do this, to do a select star accept, right? So there we go. And hopefully this will give me all the columns except, hey, there we go. We've got everything except the hire date. So pretty neat, right? We see Stephen smiling and looking thoughtful there as well.
And is it just a comma delimited list of names inside the columns?
Yes, yes. So that you're leading on nicely to the next thing there. Exactly. I mean, we can pass in as many columns as we want here, right? So it's just a comma separated list of column identifiers. So you can see I'm stripping a whole bunch out here. And at this point, you might go, is it better to list them out or exclude them? But
so the columns operator takes that comma delimited list and converts it into an array of that type?
Yes, so it's an array of column identifiers, essentially. So yeah, so if we see when we're looping through, or actually I use the member of here because it's an array, and the array is defined in that package. If you care about it, you can look it up, but it shows you can see what's in there. So yeah, basically it's just an array. You can loop through it and do all the usual array functions that we've got in PL SQL with it, right?
And Anton raises a good point. Still trying to decide if I want to know it exists. We'll come back to all that sort of thing towards the end. Now, I constantly think about patterns and generating code. So yeah. I like the accept, basically implementing an accept feature using, and it looks like it's a very simple implementation of PDFs. It seems like it wouldn't be hard to generate an accept PDF package for whatever table you want.
Well, so this is the thing. I've now done everything I need. This works for any table, right?
Any table.
And
this is the table name.
Yeah, so this is what the polymorphic and polymorphic really means. It means that basically we can pass in any kind of table. Someone on Twitter when we were announcing this kind of said, I don't know why we'd do this or I don't understand how the client would know what to do because you're getting anything back. The the thing is, you still kind of know what's going on here because you know it's this table, and you're saying just remove these columns from it. Now, I guess there's some debate. Do you know what the other columns are? But you're not doing it. It's not kind of like truly dynamic where it just kind of goes, here's a result set, and you don't know what it looks like. The point is, you are kind of controlling to some degree what its output actually is, right? So, and just kind of show that you can do it for any table. And we do the department table. There we go, and we've just removed department ID. So this is it. It works for any table. You can also pass in views as well to this.
Next question: have you put this in live SQL?
Yes, I've got a script I can share at the end, so I'll got a link for you at the end. So I've got an example. Yeah, cool. So here's a little interesting example. All right, so we've got the dual table, and I'm going to remove the dummy column from that table. So what do we think is going to happen here, right? Dual only has the dummy. The dummy is the only column in dual. So anyone want to take a guess or any thoughts about what might actually happen when we execute it?
No columns found. A new error.
It's close. I mean, we're basically returning no columns in the result set. We've stripped everything out. So if we actually execute it, and maybe you can, table contains no user visible columns. I'm not sure if this is actually new for this or it's been around for a while, but basically we've got an error because it doesn't make any sense, does it? A table that has no columns in it.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's probably not specific to this because if you made all your columns invisible.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's the same problem. You're right. Okay, so that's if we've removed everything. Let's change it slightly. So notice here that I've quoted dummy, so it's lowercase, right? What is going to happen now? What do we think is going to happen in this situation? Any guesses or thoughts?
I'm going to go with invalid column name or something along those lines.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see what happens when we run it. The query just works, right? So it's an interesting little point here. Is actually you can pass in anything which conforms to like the naming rules for identifiers, and depending on what you're doing in your polymorphic table function, it could still actually execute, right? Basically, what I'm saying is, do the columns in this table, whatever it is, happen to match these? And of course,
there were none.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing that matches that list. And in this, again, this is a bit of a contrived example, but it's just kind of show you might make a mistake or something going on here. It's different. If I try and pass an invalid table, like some actual junk, I'm going to get an error because it knows that doesn't exist.
Right.
But I can, depending on what you're doing in your PTF, you can pass in non-existent columns, and whether or not it works depends on entirely how you're processing them in the actual thing.
And notice the error there when you change dual to a nonsense name. It was invalid identifier, not table or view does not exist. That's interesting too.
Yeah. Actually, I noticed that. Yeah. So
invalid identifier. I think that's got to be because it's doing all this dynamic construction. And can you show Plowman's comment, Mark? There we go. Love these kinds of questions, don't you, Chris?
Yeah.
Why not? Come on, SQL. Well, number one, is it a SQL standard?
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know if it's a nice idea, but if it's not in the SQL standard, Oracle would never even think about implementing it anymore, maybe.
Yeah.
So, Plowman, you got to talk to the SQL committee, the ANSI standard SQL committee. Sorry.
Yeah. Talk to the SQL committee, or just find some developers at Oracle and convince them that it is absolutely what you need. Right?
Don't tell anybody. Just implement this.
Exactly. I think it's one of those where I think some people, as I was saying at the start, flex star is generally considered to be a bad thing, and some people might see this as kind of encouraging sloppy coding. So
well, again, I think your point is, and again, that's exactly when I was thinking I would want to use it, is when I'm just running some reports to check out some data, and exactly what you said, select star, you get this long list. And like Apex reporting is very flexible, but yeah, I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
But surely this isn't the reason they made PDFs.
Oh no, this specifically wasn't. I'm sure it wasn't. So actually, I've got I'll do a couple of other things very quickly. One is, I said I wanted to remove this row number from the results, right? So what's going to happen here now? So I'm trying to do my filtering of this row number, but I've removed it from the output. Interesting. Well,
I think they shouldn't.
Yeah, it shouldn't work. It's not going to work because
it's not there.
It's not there. So the from clause is processed before the where clause, right? So we've removed it from the output before we've used it. Okay. Another little thing to notice here is this is not actually a table, right? I passed in the with clause, the name subquery.
That's not known in the SQL layer.
Yeah, exactly. So it knows that this is in fact that query, and essentially it's passing that in to this. So if we've got that intermediate processing, as I was talking about, we actually need to do that, have another step in the process before we can then remove it in the results. Okay. So
wait, no.
Thing to be aware
so the previous one, you couldn't pass RWS to accept calls.
So you can pass. Hang on. Let's remove the where clause. That might make it a bit clearer. So I can remove it from the results. I just can't use it in the where clause. Oops, pressing the wrong thing there. Because it's not returned from this. So then we can't use it in the where, and we can't select it and that kind of thing. Whereas here, I'm doing the processing I need to first, and then removing it from the results. So it's just kind of an order of processing thing to be aware of. So there was someone made a point about removing clob and blob columns from the results, which I think is a great one, because of course quite often they're huge, really large, and particularly blobs. A lot of clients can't really render them, so you just get this junk back, or it just says blob or something like that, right? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create an overload, two versions of this, one which accepts the list of columns, and the other which accepts a data type, right? So that just accepts the data type now. So we can do that. We can have our two describe functions overload it, and I've moved the function itself inside the package. So we've got the overloads of that as well. Okay, so let's just create that. We've got the implementations, that's the same. And here we're just checking the type matches the type that we passed here, so the data type. And we'll create that. And now, so I can do accept and remove a particular column, or I can remove all the numbers, all the numeric ones. And if we look at the customer orders schema, which we created a couple of years ago, it's got these two blob columns, details and image. We can also do that. We can say remove the blob from the result set, and there we go. They've gone, right? Sounds pretty neat, right?
Yeah, that is neat.
Yes. So one thing to note about this is, so far I've talked about polymorphic table functions, and last time I was talking about SQL macros. It's worth noting that at least we're reasonably confident that any of these describe only ones, where you're basically just essentially removing columns or maybe adding them, you could actually create them as a SQL macro instead. Okay, so I've done the same here. I'm just iterating through the list of columns that we want to remove. I'm iterating through all the columns in the table, building up a list unless it's in that one. And there we go. We get the same kind of functionality there, where I've removed employee ID that time, right? So this is someone's going to say, why would you use one or the other, right? And it's one of those. It's a big kind of really comes down to what you prefer, really.
And whether you have a version of Oracle database that has SQL macros in it. PDFs have been around a lot longer than SQL macros.
Well, it's only because macros were backported, or table macros have been backported to 19C, and PTFs are in 18, which I believe is now unsupported. So you should be, if you're on that, you should be upgrading. And 21CXE is out as well. So if you're, say, you're using 18CXE, should really move to 21CXE. Yeah, there's maybe a version argument, but it's a lot smaller than it used to be, right?
Right.
Yeah. There is actually one functional difference which is worth being aware of. So if I put the macro inside the with clause like this, it's going to error because, as it says, it's unsupported. I'm hoping this will change. That may change. Obviously, no promises. Disclaimer. Right?
One of those restrictions that are we couldn't get it done in time, as opposed to there's some serious problem with being able to do it.
It's partly that, but it comes down to actually SQL parsing, really, and it just becomes quite complicated, right? So
it's already really complicated. Yeah. What's the difference? So it's a little bit more complicated. What's the problem? Stop complaining.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I failed my compiler design class at university, so no. We'll see. Anyway, but we can do it with a polymorphic table function, right? So we can use the PTF inside a with clause, which it's a bit of a small thing, but again, it might be one of those things that matters to some people in some scenarios. So. And I didn't actually have that many any other examples that I actually created with PTFs, because actually really now we've got macros, it's hard to come up with good general purpose cases you would create a PTF for, right? I mean, select star except maybe, it's kind of personal preference really, but a lot of the other ones, the other general case ones I can think of, actually would be better implemented as a macro, right? So
the bottom line is we just want to offer our sympathies to the developers who work so hard to create polymorphic table functions. The code might not
yeah, I mean, you could say that, but then equally, I think SQL macros probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for polymorphic table functions, because if you notice, the macro is actually reusing that package and things like that. So they do kind of lead into each other. So, I mean, it basically, if you're adding a column to the result set and doing all sorts of really complicated formulaic procedural processing to set its values, then you should create a PTF. One example that's been floated is if you're calling an R script. So you can call R in the database, in Oracle database, and you need to merge that with your SQL data. Might be really useful for some people, personally, but
so you can use the SQL macro so much to integrate different data sources compared to the PDF.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things that for the PTF is really, if you were reading external data sources somehow, I'm kind of like reaching my limits of what we can do here. But
anyway, perfect. Yeah. All right, so Chris has run out of reasons to use polymorphic table functions, but I'm sure none of you feel like you wasted the last 20 minutes of your life learning about them. I love the accept calls thing, and I'm looking forward to the live SQL script. I'll grab that code and use one or the other of the implementations. Cool. All right. Anything else on PDFs or news from the Oracle SQL space you'd like to share before we shift gears?
Like I say, I think they're cool. It's if you want to play around with them and have some fun, welcome to. But to be honest, they are quite a neat niche feature. You're better reading up on SQL macros and learning about those instead, really.
There's going to be a lot of energy around those in the future, I think. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Great. Okay, so now we're going to shift into the final phase of Feuertip number whatever it is. So Chris is going to offer one of his favorite cultural artifacts. I believe it's a book. I'm going to
Yes.
show 3 different organizations. One person who's on the call will pick which organization InSum will give $25 to this week in our efforts to do our little bit to help heal the planet. Hopefully everybody can do that. So let me show the organizations. And Martin Malieu, I'd like you to pick the group. I really liked your pointing out about avoiding blob clob columns with accept. So let's get this out of the way. Let's go to, so this week, 3 organizations that Martin can choose from. One is the Equitable Communities Fund, the Trust for Public Land, basically supporting and promoting social justice and climate justice as we work to heal our planet. Save the Frogs. I don't know if you know, well, I'm sure you know about frogs, but frogs have been hit very hard by climate change. And in particular, there's a fungus that is spreading across the world that suffocates frogs. So we need to save frogs, Save the Frogs campaign, and Elephant Aid International Projects. So an elephant refuge in North America and helping to save elephants and keep them from going extinct. Oh, I hope that doesn't happen in our lifetime. So Martin, let us know via the chat. You can stop sharing now, Mark. Let us know via the chat which of those 3 organizations you'd like us to give the money to. And Chris, over to you for a cultural artifact.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to recommend this week is a book I read a couple of months ago. It's called The Scout Mindset by Julia Galef. And they're saying it's about seeing things how they really are. And the kind of premise is comparing it to the soldier mindset. So a lot of us, I know I've done this. I'm sure you've probably done this. You certainly know people who've done this. And that's when you're discussing something or arguing or debating with them about something, and they seek to kind of defend their position. A lot of actually the language around debating and arguing is very kind of like soldier oriented, in like you're shoring up your position, you're defending your arguments, that kind of thing. And evolutionary, this made a lot of sense. But we're not under threat of dying individually these days generally. And the argument, it's better to take kind of like a scout mindset and kind of look around and try and really understand what's actually going on. And there's several reasons for this. I'm here kind of explaining how something works. I'd like to think that I'm explaining it properly and I'm teaching you something real, right? So, if you're learning something, it's important to kind of be able to focus and think, well, is this actually helping, and so on. But also, if we all get into debates and try and change people's opinions, it's also worth thinking about what's actually effective, right? You can just say your arguments and kind of go, I believe this for whatever. But if that's not true, then good chance that people on the other side are not going to be convinced by that. If you can go, well, okay, this is how I see things, this is how I believe them, and you can incorporate their positions, then it becomes a bit easier, or it can become a bit easier to bring people along with you. So basically, it just kind of goes through why this is a good idea, techniques you can use to kind of help you see, help you identify what the truth is, that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed this. I'd recommend it if you just want to, if you're learning anything or you want to be able to help understand things better.
And maybe if you want to stay connected to reality a little bit better. So you can read The Scout Mindset, or you can join the metaverse. I'd say that's
yeah,
that's really
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
What I've been reading lately in my own personal experience, and boy, in social media, arguing with people, telling them they're wrong, does nothing except make things worse. You just harden the position. So I'm really focusing on asking people what they think and why they think it, and just asking questions, getting them to talk about it. And at least they'll see me more favorably. So, okay, thanks so much. And Martin has chosen the Elephant Organization, so we'll help to save elephants from extinction. Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you, Chris, for joining us. I'm going to try to come up with some other ideas that you can present at Feuertips, so that will work. For the rest of you, stay safe, get vaccinated if you're not vaccinated, stay in mask when you're joining other people, avoid large crowds like 50,000 people at a concert. Just don't go. Okay, anyway, thanks again, and we'll see you all soon. Happy Thanksgiving if I don't see you back before the holidays, and please participate in Apex D2D. Take care. Bye.